The images was that they were, florists and hairdressers, and they flounced around in a very flamboyant way. It's not fair. It's horrible to say those words today, but that was what society communicated. Hi, this is Mike Balaban. Welcome to another episode of BAMMER Tales. Today I'd like to take you back to my childhood in the panhandle of Florida in the 1950s and 60s and describe what it was like for a young boy growing up with a secret that he was attracted to other boys, which he couldn't allow to be known. My parents had met in an Ivy League university in the Northeast and began dating, and eventually my mom got pregnant, actually, before they were married, which was a big deal in those days. But they managed to hide it, got married, and ran away from their families. And they moved to the panhandle of Florida, where they bought a cattle ranch, a broken down old plantation, which had 800 acres on it. And my first childhood friends were the sons of sharecroppers who rented out an old shanty on our farm, and they were black. It was an era when it was racially segregated in that part of the country. And then when I went to my first kindergarten at age 5, suddenly I was thrust into an all-white school, and I no longer had those black friends, and I didn't understand what that was all about, but it was the times, the 1950s in the Florida Panhandle on the border of Alabama. Well, what was it like for a young boy like me who inwardly began to recognize that I was attracted to other boys, or realistically, one boy at a time? The social norms were such and the disapproval was such that if you had any tendencies to be attracted to boys and they became apparent, you got punished in no uncertain terms. You could be put in a mental institution for admitting you were gay. You could be put in jail. You could be disowned by your family, excommunicated by your church, fired by your employer if you were an adult. So all the signals were, don't be that way. There were no positive role models in TV or in the movies, in media in general. In fact, the only references to homosexuality were to characters that were kind of unsavory, and it was inferred that they were gay. And the ending of the movie or story was they always went to jail, killed themselves, or were killed off. So without any happy endings and any positive role models, anyone who thought they might be attracted to another boy got the message, you don't want to be that way. And so accordingly, as I began to know that I was attracted to the 5-year-old in my kindergarten class, and I've told that story in an early episode, I think it might be BAMMER Tales number 2, where we played doctor together, or other moments throughout my adolescence and teen years where I had crushes on, other members of the teams I was on. I couldn't share that with them. I might try to sense if there was any reciprocity or reciprocal interest on their part. There never was, so I just kept it internally hidden. Not only that, I didn't want to be that way. I kept telling myself I was going to change. I was not going to let my fantasies drift towards boys. That I would meet the right young woman and she would set me straight. All right up until I was 20, the hope was that I would change, and I wasn't really this way. And because I played on football teams and basketball teams and track teams, I came across as being straight. The whole world told me I was straight. So I must be straight. There are no examples of athletes, of unaffected masculine men like me that I can see that are supposedly queer. All the role models were masculine men, and that's what I saw. And since I assumed that homosexuals were effeminate, that they were effete, that they were, weak, that they were maybe womanly, the images was that they were, florists and hairdressers, and they flounced around in a very flamboyant way. It's not fair. It's horrible to say those words today, but that was what society communicated. As a result, I didn't have sex with another human being until I was 20. I took a woman to prom, the junior prom with me. I tried to get excited and we made out in the car, afterwards, but it never happened. And so I kept everything under wraps and I kept convincing myself I was going to change. And then all of a sudden, in my sophomore year in college, I went off to a summer program in France where I lived with a family and I studied at the university to learn the language. And at the end of that summer, I grabbed a ride with another person in the program who I found very attractive. And I should say that I'm a demisexual. Even back then, my attractions were specific to individuals. Not just every good-looking masculine guy would attract me. There had to be somebody that I had a personal connection with. There was a charisma between him and me. So this guy, I thought we might have that, but when we got to Paris, he disappeared, and I was left on my own for my final 3 nights in France before flying home at the end of the summer to rejoin my family and then ultimately go back to my university. And I bought a ticket to O Calcutta, which was an all-nude review, which was revolutionary for the time, kind of a Broadway show in Paris in French. It was supposed to be on my second night. On my first day there, I was walking down the Champs-Élysées, the central avenue of Paris, and I saw an erotic bookshop, a dirty bookstore off to the side on a side street. And I wandered in and I kind of browsed around and eventually found the male book section and video section. And I was obviously excited, even though it was taboo. And all of a sudden, one of the employees of the shop came up from behind me, noticing what I was watching, and I was an attractive 20-year-old guy. And he whispered in my ear in French, "There are some films downstairs." I'm like, "What?" "There's some films downstairs." "Oh, okay, thanks." So I wandered downstairs, this carpeted stairway into this subterranean floor, and there were a bunch of projectors with films in them. And I didn't know what I was supposed to do, but the guy came downstairs and put some coins in, which allowed the machine to start playing. And I'm watching this all-male video unfold. And all of a sudden, I realize he's kneeling down in front of me and unbuckling my jeans and taking out my penis and putting it in his mouth. And I freaked. And I was equally excited because I'm a horny 20-year-old never having had sex, and I'm gay. But I'm also aghast and turned off, and really the thought of it is making me sick. But I let him proceed, and he took me to orgasm. I exploded. I buckled up my pants. I ran upstairs and out into the street and sat on a bench just off the Champs-Élysées, and I was nauseous and queasy and on the verge of throwing up. And that was the result of all the upbringing I'd had teaching me how wrong it was. It took me several years after that before I began to managed to understand that sex was a beautiful thing, even with another man, and to allow it to be something I considered possible and desirable. And today, there are people in places like the state of Florida where they're banning books from high school libraries, trying to prevent kids from knowing about LGBTQ people under the theory that supposedly we're grooming them and trying to turn them into other queers. That's not the case. They want to control their kids' minds so they ultimately can force us back in the closet so that we can become just like the little boy I grew up to be in Florida in the 1960s. And if I have anything to say about it, we're not going to let that happen. Thank you for listening. This is Mike Balaban, BAMMER Tales.